The red microphone icon on my screen turned solid gray, slashed through with a diagonal line. Muted. I didn't click it. Preston Thorne did. In front of 130 colleagues, the entire board of directors, and the general counsel, a 32-year-old kid in a custom-tailored blazer had just silenced me. I didn't try to unmute. I didn't raise my virtual hand. I just stared at my reflection in the dark bezel of my laptop. My name is Gavin Reynolds. I am 55 years old. And for 5 years, I have been the quiet infrastructure engineer keeping Omnicore systems from imploding. I built the logistics engine that kept our biggest client, Vanguard Solutions, from taking their $14,000 zero-zone enterprise contract elsewhere. But Preston Thorne didn't care about servers or contracts. He cared about presentation slide decks and the sound of his own voice. I live just outside Charlotte, North Carolina. It is a quiet place, which suited me fine after 30 years in the tech sector. When I first joined Omnicore, the founder was still running the show. He was an old-school operator who knew that a software company is only as good as the databases running behind it. He used to call me the last safety net. He told the board that if Gavin didn't catch an issue, it meant the system was already dead. Back then, execution meant something. We built, we tested, we delivered. If a regional logistics pipeline failed at 3 a.m., I was the one who woke up, tracked the packet loss, and patched the routing table before the client even realized their trucks were delayed. I didn't ask for bonuses or public praise. I just wanted my systems to run clean. But then the founder retired, and the board appointed a new chairman. That chairman had a nephew. Enter Preston Thorne, fresh out of a business school that charges more for tuition than most people make. In a decade, Preston walked into Omnicore with a shiny laptop, a collection of expensive watches, and absolutely zero experience in enterprise databases. He was appointed VP of Operations on his first day. I knew the type within 5 minutes of his introductory presentation. He spoke in rapid-fire corporate jargon, throwing around words like operational velocity, frictionless synergy, and paradigm shifts. He treated the engineering team like we were assembly line workers who just needed to turn the widgets faster. By the end of his first week, the changes started. I noticed my calendar was suddenly empty. The weekly operational syncs with Vanguard Solutions, meetings I had run for 4 years, simply vanished from my schedule. I sent a message to the director of engineering asking why I had been removed. The response was polite but vague. Preston was restructuring the reporting lines to streamline communications. I was told not to worry and to focus on back-end maintenance. Meanwhile, Preston started rolling out his new operational dashboard. It was a beautiful web application with smooth transitions, interactive pie charts, and a sleek mobile view. The executives loved it. The only problem was that the dashboard was completely detached from reality. It pulled aggregated data from a staging database, hiding the actual latency spikes and packet loss that our real systems were experiencing. I recognized the underlying data structure immediately. It was my own telemetry work, copied and pasted into a new front end, with my name scrubbed entirely from the documentation. Preston had presented it to the board as his own proprietary operations framework. I didn't make a scene. I simply logged into our internal version control system, pulled the commit logs showing that 95% of the codebase was written by me over the last 3 years, and saved the files to a secure external drive. I labeled the folder Clown Show. I also started keeping a daily log of every operational decision Preston made. I wasn't trying to be petty. I've been in this industry long enough to know that when a kid who has never seen a production server starts playing with the routing logic, a crash is inevitable. I wanted to make sure my name wasn't on the autopsy report. The first major warning sign came in week 3. Preston wanted to show the board how fast we could deploy updates. He scheduled a production database migration during the peak of Vanguard's Tuesday morning logistics run. In our industry, you never deploy database changes during high traffic hours. It is an unwritten rule, written in the scars of every engineer over 40. I flagged the deployment in the operations Slack channel, writing a detailed warning about potential connection pooling failures and transaction lockups. Preston replied almost instantly. "Let's take this offline, Gavin. We need to focus on momentum, not legacy hesitation." The migration went ahead. The connection pool locked up, and Vanguard's regional terminal in Dallas lost tracking capabilities for 42 minutes. It almost triggered an SLA penalty. Preston managed to bury the incident in his weekly report, labeling it a scheduled network optimization window. I saved the Slack exchange, the database logs, and the client outage notification into my private folder under the label Burial Attempt. By week 5, Preston decided that the legacy clutter needed to go. He made a post in the general Slack channel, announcing that the company was transitioning to an offshore support model for client escalations. He wrote about maximizing cost efficiency and leveraging global time zones. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew what it meant. My role was being phased out. I was no longer allowed to communicate directly with Nora Caldwell, Vanguard's risk director. Nora was a tough, no-nonsense executive who had worked with me to build their custom tracking systems. We had spent weeks during the 2020 pandemic rewriting their master service agreement to ensure their supply lines never went dark. She didn't trust Omnicore. She trusted me. When I tried to log into the Vanguard dashboard on Monday morning to check their weekend replication logs, I got a permission denied error. My administrator credentials had been revoked. I called Preston directly. It was the first time I had initiated a call with him. I asked him if legal had reviewed the access changes, noting that Vanguard's contract had strict clauses regarding data continuity and lead ownership. Preston laughed. He told me that legal worked for the company, not for the legacy engineers. He said Vanguard wanted automation, not babysitting, and that the offshore team had everything under control. I told him he was making a mistake. He told me that I was overthinking it and hung up. I opened my copy of the 2020 Master Service Agreement, scrolled down to Section 8.2 ZA, and highlighted the key personnel clause. Preston had no idea what was written in that document, but I did. And more importantly, Nora Caldwell did. I saved the highlighted contract and shut my laptop. The stage was set. I just had to wait for the next all-hands meeting. The all-hands Zoom call started at 9:90 a.m. sharp on a Thursday. It was the standard quarterly alignment meeting, the kind where executives tell the staff how well the company is doing while the staff wonders if their departments are about to be downsized. I logged in at 8:58, keeping my camera off and my microphone muted. The participant count quickly climbed to 130. I scanned the grid of names. The board of directors was there, including the chairman. Miles Vance, our general counsel, had his camera on, looking through a stack of papers, and of course, Preston Thorne was front and center. Wearing a fresh gray blazer and a smile that looked like it had been painted on by a marketing team. Preston started the presentation. For the first 20 minutes, it was the usual corporate noise. He ran through a slide deck filled with colorful bar graphs and bullet points about cost optimization and resource reallocation. He spoke with high energy, using phrases like scaling our delivery footprint and removing operational friction. He was building up to the announcement of the offshore transition, framing it as a major victory for corporate efficiency. I sat in my kitchen, sipping lukewarm coffee, waiting for my scheduled 3-minute slot to present the quarterly infrastructure reliability metrics. When Preston finally called my name, I turned my camera on and shared my screen. I pulled up the actual 90-day incident resolution curve. The graph was clean. Despite the minor outage Preston had caused 2 weeks earlier, we had maintained 99.99% uptime for Vanguard Solutions. I started explaining the data. I wanted the board and the general counsel to see that the system was stable because we had dedicated manual oversight watching the replication loops. I got about 3 sentences out. I was in the middle of explaining how we mitigated a database lockup when Preston interrupted me. His voice boomed through the speakers, cutting me off mid-sentence. "Thanks, Gavin," he said, his smile never wavering. "Actually, we are pivoting roles on this project to better align with our global strategy. As of this week, we are transitioning direct escalation ownership to our new dedicated offshore team. Gavin will be shifting his focus to legacy support systems." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could speak, my screen share was abruptly terminated. A notification popped up on my screen. "Host has muted you." My microphone icon turned gray with a red slash. Preston didn't just mute me. He locked the settings so I couldn't unmute myself. In front of 130 people, including the board members who had once praised my work, I had been silenced like an annoying pop-up ad. I sat there, my face visible in my small Zoom square. I didn't scowl. I didn't shake my head. I didn't type a single letter in the chat window, which was already starting to fill with confused messages from the engineering staff. I simply leaned forward, reached out, and closed my laptop lid. The kitchen was quiet. I took a deep breath, stood up, and poured the rest of my coffee down the sink. I wasn't angry. In fact, I felt a strange sense of relief. For 5 years, I had carried the weight of Omnicore's commitments on my shoulders, working 80-hour weeks and waking up at all hours of the night to keep their systems online. I had done it out of a sense of professional pride, believing that hard work and technical expertise would eventually be respected. But the mute button had washed all of that away. It was a clear, unambiguous statement of how the new leadership valued my contributions. Later that afternoon, I opened my personal computer and pulled up the original 2020 Master Service Agreement with Vanguard Solutions. I scrolled down to Section 8.2c. The text was clear and precise. It was a key personnel continuity clause, drafted by Nora Caldwell and myself during a tense 2-week period when the pandemic was threatening to shut down their entire logistics network. Vanguard had demanded that I be named specifically in the agreement. The clause stated that Gavin Reynolds was the designated escalation lead, and that any change to this designation or the voluntary resignation of Gavin Reynolds would constitute a material breach of the agreement. In the event of such a breach, Vanguard Solutions reserved the right to terminate the contract immediately, without notice and without paying any early termination fees. Omnicore's legal department had signed off on the contract in 2020 without a second thought. At the time, the company was desperate to secure the $14 million deal, and they viewed the clause as a harmless detail. They assumed I would never leave, or that if I did, they could easily negotiate a transition. They had forgotten the clause even existed. But Nora Caldwell hadn't forgotten. We had spoken about it several times over the years. She knew that without my direct involvement, Omnicore's software was just a fragile shell. I spent the next 2 hours downloading my personal logs, design documents, and email correspondences. I didn't touch Omnicore's proprietary code. I didn't delete any files from the server. I didn't plant any logic bombs or change any database passwords. That would be illegal, and I had no intention of giving their lawyers any leverage. I simply gathered the evidence of my own work, including the screenshots of Preston silencing my warnings and revoking my access. I packaged everything into a single, encrypted file and uploaded it to my private cloud storage. I didn't notify HR. I didn't send an email to my director. I didn't even reach out to Nora Caldwell to warn her. I wanted the sequence of events to play out naturally, without any accusation of coordination or interference. I had helped build the foundation of this company, but they had chosen to erase my name. Now they were going to find out what happens when the foundation walks out the door. I shut down my computer, packed my personal keyboard and mouse into my backpack, and left the office. I had one more day left on my calendar, and I intended to make it count. The night before my resignation, I stayed late at the office. The building was empty except for the cleaning crew and the low hum of the vending machine down the hall. I went to my desk, opened the drawers, and started sorting through 5 years of history. There were scribbled notes from midnight outages, printed system architecture diagrams, and custom cable ties I had bought with my own money. I threw most of it in the trash. I didn't want any clutter, and I didn't want to leave anything behind that could connect me to the systems. I wiped down the desk surface with a sanitizer wipe, unplugged my personal mechanical keyboard, and packed it into my backpack. Finally, I took my plastic building badge, slid it into a small white envelope, and wrote a single line on the front in black marker. Effective 9:01 a.m. The next morning, I woke up at 6, made my coffee, and sat at my kitchen table. The weekly operational follow-up Zoom meeting was scheduled for 8:55. It was a mandatory call for the entire engineering department, the board of directors, and the executive leadership team. I had already prepared my move. I opened my Zoom client settings and uploaded a custom virtual background. It was a simple black screen with bold white text centered in the middle. Effective 9:01 a.m. I joined the meeting at 8:58. My camera was off, and my microphone was muted. I watched the grid of squares fill up. There were 140 people on the list now. Preston Thorne was already sharing his screen, presenting a new timeline diagram for the offshore transition. He was in full pitch mode, his voice loud and confident. "Today marks the beginning of our new operational era," he said. "We are streamlining our escalation pathways, reducing overhead, and ensuring 24-hour coverage for all our major enterprise contracts. Our primary target is Vanguard Solutions, our crown jewel. These changes will guarantee long-term stability and increased operational velocity." I watched the clock in the bottom right corner of my screen, 8:59. 9. The seconds ticked away. Preston was still talking, running through a slide about cost efficiencies. At exactly 9:01, I clicked the camera icon. My video feed popped up in the grid. Because of my black background and the bright white text, it immediately stood out against the standard home offices and corporate backgrounds. I didn't unmute. I didn't say a word. I simply held up the white envelope containing my physical building badge in my left hand and my signed resignation letter in my right hand. The letter was dated, timestamped 9:01 a.m., and signed in bold ink. I held them steady, right in front of the camera lens, so everyone on the call could read the text clearly. The reaction was almost instantaneous. The chat window on the side of the Zoom interface, which had been silent, suddenly flared to life. One of the senior developers typed, "Wait, is this real?" Another engineer posted a shocked emoji. I saw Miles Vance, the general counsel, lean forward so close to his camera that his face filled the entire square. He was squinting at the screen, reading the timestamp on my letter and the text on my background. He knew exactly what 9:01 a.m. meant. The contract deadline for the daily SLA reports was 9 a.m. By resigning at 9:01, I was officially off the clock and the key personnel clause was active. Preston Thorne noticed the shift in attention. His voice faltered mid-sentence as he looked at the participant grid. His confident smile cracked. "Gavin, what is this?" he asked, trying to sound casual but failing. "Let's discuss this offline. This isn't the appropriate forum for personnel updates." I didn't answer, I didn't lower my hands, and I didn't change my expression. I kept my camera focused on the badge and the resignation letter. "Gavin, I'm going to ask you to turn off your camera," Preston said, his voice rising in pitch. "We need to proceed with the agenda." Still, I said nothing. I saw Miles Vance turn his head, talking to someone off camera. His expression was tight, his jaw clenched. He was no longer looking at Preston's slides. He was typing furiously on his phone. The chairman's square, which had been a static corporate logos, suddenly turned on its camera, showing him sitting in a dark boardroom staring at his screen with a look of pure confusion. I had given them every warning. I had flagged the database risks. I had warned Preston about the continuity clauses, and I had documented the system vulnerabilities. They had ignored me, muted me, and tried to write me out of their corporate story. Now, they were watching the story rewrite itself in real time, and they couldn't do a thing to stop it. I held the badge and the letter for another 10 seconds, letting the silence stretch across the call. Then, I moved my mouse cursor to the bottom right corner of the Zoom window, clicked the red leave button, and closed my laptop lid. I stood up, walked to my bedroom, grabbed my light jacket, and walked out of my apartment. The morning air was cool and crisp. The streets were quiet. I didn't check my phone. I didn't log into my Slack client. I simply got into my car and drove down to a local diner. I ordered a full breakfast, eggs, bacon, hash browns, and black coffee, and sat by the window, watching the traffic go by. For the first time in 5 years, my phone wasn't buzzing with server alerts or emergency pages. It was completely silent. I took a bite of my toast and smiled. The clock was running, and Omnicore was about to find out how much my silence really cost. I didn't turn my phone back on until Saturday morning. When the screen finally lit up, it was flooded with notifications. There were 24 missed calls, 18 text messages, and a dozen Slack alerts from former colleagues who had managed to find my personal number. I ignored the messages from management and scrolled straight to a text from one of the senior database administrators. The message was brief. "Vanguard just sent the notice. It is over." At 7:12 a.m. that morning, the official contract termination letter from Vanguard Solutions had arrived in the inbox of Omnicore's executive team. The document was signed by Nora Caldwell, Vanguard's risk director. It was a formal, cold, and legally absolute message. It stated that due to the voluntary resignation of Gavin Reynolds, the designated escalation lead, Omnicore Systems was in material breach of the Master Service Agreement under Section 8.2 c. Vanguard was exercising its right to terminate the partnership immediately, without penalty, effective as of 9:01 a.m. the previous day. Just like that, $14,000 in annual recurring revenue vanished from Omnicore's books. By Saturday afternoon, the internal panic had spilled out of control. I received screenshots from the company's private Slack channels from an old teammate. Preston Thorne had spent Friday evening trying to control the damage, posting long, rambling updates in the executive channel. He wrote about strategic resets, building back stronger, and how this loss created breathing room to realign our delivery architecture. He was still trying to sell vibes, even as the ship was sinking, but the board wasn't buying it anymore. The chairman called an emergency meeting with the major investors at 2 p.m. According to the leaks, the meeting was a bloodbath. One of the lead investors, a representative from a New York hedge fund that owned 15% of Omnicore's stock, cut Preston off during his slide presentation. The investor asked a single direct question: who owns the Vanguard client relationship right now? Preston froze. The meeting audio, which was later described to me by 3 different sources, went completely silent. There was a 10-second pause that felt like 10 years. Nobody spoke. Preston looked at his camera, his mouth open, unable to find a buzzword to cover the fact that he had pushed out the only person the client trusted. Finally, Miles Vance, the general counsel, unmuted his microphone and spoke in a flat, exhausted voice. No one. Gavin resigned, and the contract is dead. That was the end of the corporate curtain. Once the truth was out, the engineering team went into open rebellion. A screen recording of my resignation during the Zoom call had been saved by one of the developers. They shared it in a private industry forum on Saturday night. The clip showed Preston presenting his slides, my video feed popping up with the black effective 9:01 a.m. background, and me holding up my badge and letter in absolute silence. The caption read, "VP mutes infrastructure lead live on air. Client walks with $14 million the next morning." The post went viral within the software engineering community. By Sunday afternoon, the clip had been shared thousands of times on LinkedIn and Twitter. It became a case study in corporate incompetence. Memes started circulating. One showed Preston's face next to a slide about operational velocity, and below it, my black Zoom background with the caption, "The face of $14,000. Auser walking out the door." People from marketing, sales, and HR who had never spoken to me before were sending private messages to my old team, asking if the story was real and if the clause was actually valid. Meanwhile, I was at home, enjoying my Sunday. I made a peanut butter and banana sandwich, poured a glass of ginger ale, and sat on my porch with the window open, listening to the birds. I felt lighter than I had in years. My phone sat on the kitchen counter, silent. I checked it once at 4 p.m. and saw a voicemail from Nora Caldwell. I played the message. Her voice was calm with a slight hint of amusement. "Power move, Gavin," she said. "I already told the board at Vanguard that we are looking for an external logistic consultant. Let's talk on Monday." I set the phone down and went back to my sandwich. I didn't need to rush. By Monday morning, my LinkedIn inbox was overflowing. I had received messages from 8 different logistics, software firms, and startups. One message from a CEO of a mid-sized tech shop in Raleigh caught my eye. The message read, "We saw the clip. We don't have a VP of operations, we don't use the word synergy, and we need someone who actually knows how to keep databases running. Let's talk." At Omnicore, the fallout was just beginning. The board realized that they couldn't sue me because I hadn't violated any non-compete agreements or intellectual property laws. I had simply exercised my right to resign. The emergency board meeting ended with a vote of no confidence. Preston Thorne was stripped of his operational authority on Monday afternoon. His name was quietly removed from the company directory, his Slack account was deactivated, and his upcoming calendar events were deleted. When a junior developer asked in the general channel where Preston went, one of the tech leads replied with a single skull emoji. The buzzword era was officially over, but the damage was already done. Omnicore was bleeding, and they were about to realize that Vanguard was only the first client to notice the crack in the foundation. The emergency board meeting at Omnicore was just the beginning of their troubles. Within a week, the M&A deal they had been quietly negotiating for 6 months fell through. The prospective buyers, spooked by the sudden loss of the Vanguard contract, demanded a full audit of all active enterprise service agreements. They wanted to know if there were any other key personnel clauses hidden in the paperwork. When Omnicore couldn't guarantee that other critical engineers wouldn't follow my lead, the buyers pulled their offer off the table. The company valuation plummeted, a hiring freeze was put in place, and development budgets were locked down. Then the engineering exit started. I wasn't the only developer who had grown tired of Preston's management style. Over the next 2 weeks, 8 senior engineers and systems administrators quietly submitted their resignations. They didn't write angry Slack messages. They didn't make scenes in meetings. They simply filed their notices, skipped their exit interviews, and walked out. They saw the writing on the wall. A company that silences its technical leads and prioritizes presentations, slides over operational stability, is a company with no future. I had already moved on. I accepted an offer from the lean software firm in Raleigh. The company had 8 people, a clear development pipeline, and absolutely no corporate bureaucracy. I had my interview with the CEO on a Tuesday. He was wearing a flannel shirt and opened the call by saying, "All right, Gavin, let's not waste each other's time. Show me what you built." There were no trick questions, no corporate buzzwords, and no personality assessment tests. They just wanted to know if I could keep their back-end systems stable. I signed the contract that same afternoon. By my second day, I had full database credentials. By my third day, I had the deployment metrics running clean. It was real work, done by people who actually cared about execution. A week after I started, a small white package was delivered to my new apartment. There was no return address on the box. Inside was a collection of hand-cut flowers, lavender, eucalyptus, and a single snapdragon in the center, tied together with garden twine. There was a small note card tucked into the stems. It read, "If you want to come back, we will do it your way." There was no logo, no signature, and no name on the card. But I knew the handwriting. It was from the assistant to the board of directors. The remaining executive leadership at Omnicore was desperate. They had tried to run the logistics platform with the offshore team, but without my manual routing configurations, the database latency had spiked to unacceptable levels. Vanguard had officially migrated their operations to another service provider, and 2 other mid-sized clients were already threatening to exercise their own contract clauses. They wanted me to come back and fix the mess they had made. I read the note twice, set it down on my kitchen counter, and smiled. I didn't call the assistant back. I didn't send an email. I simply picked up the note card, walked to my desk, and opened the folder where I kept the copy of the Vanguard contract. I slid the note behind the printed page of Section 8.2 SA, closed the drawer, and sat down at my new workspace. My exit hadn't been loud. I didn't raise my voice or make a scene. It was simply exact. I had spent 5 years holding up a system for a company that thought I was replaceable. When they muted me, they proved that they didn't understand what kept their business running. They had painted the hood of the car, but they had forgotten to put oil in the engine. I left a crater behind, but I didn't dig it. They did. I just stopped holding up the walls. Later that afternoon, I logged into my new company's operations dashboard. A notification popped up in the admin console from our CEO. It was a direct message. "Thanks for catching that packet replication error during the launch. You saved our deployment." It was a simple 2-sentence note. No corporate templates, no board review. Just recognition for the work I had done. I cracked my knuckles, opened the routing table, and began typing my response. I didn't write an essay. I didn't use any buzzwords. I just laid out the technical fix, sent the message, and went back to work. For the first time in 5 years, the systems were running, the clients were happy, and the screen was quiet. That was all I ever wanted.